Thank you for coming. Before we get started, we like to ask a few questions. Have you ever bought a product and found it wasn't what was advertised? Sure. Have you ever voted for a politician and didn't get what was promised? Of course, we all have. It's the same with the package called free trade. It is not what is being presented. Let's look at what a couple of the founding fathers said about trade, or in their words, commerce. First, George Washington gave us a warning in his farewell address in 1796. He said, "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with a portion of the foreign world." Now, he didn't mean any particular portion, he meant any portion of the foreign world. Thomas Jefferson continued Washington's warning about foreign alliances, but added commerce into the mix. In 1799, he said, quote, "Commerce with all nations, alliance with none, shall be our motto," unquote. 2 years later, he said, quote, "I deem the essential principles of our government peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none," unquote. As you can see, Jefferson affirmed the goodness of foreign commerce, but at the same time strongly warned us against entangling alliances. In the beginning, we had foreign entanglements, but eliminated them by 1800, and did not get involved with them again until we joined the United Nations 145 years later. So to summarize what our founders told us about trade and foreign alliances, trade is good, while entangling alliances are bad. And, as a brief review, recall that the purpose of the United States government can be boiled down to 1, maintaining our national independence. What was the first document that we studied in school about our American system? It was the Declaration of Independence. It sets down the basic philosophy for our Constitution and our system of government. Independence is the most important responsibility of our government. Without independence, we cannot maintain our Constitution or our Bill of Rights, let alone make our own decisions as a people. Rarely, if ever, do neoconservatives and those who advocate free trade ever discuss our independence and the need to maintain it. The next purpose of government is to protect our God-given rights, which include life, liberty, and property. On the other hand, government was not established to regulate business, form permanent alliances, or abrogate the Constitution. Yet these things are done on an almost daily basis, especially with executive orders. The Constitution granted Congress the exclusive power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states, which means that the Constitution did not grant any power to the President or executive branch to regulate commerce. Let me repeat this last point for emphasis. The Constitution did not grant any power to the President or executive branch to regulate foreign commerce. And Congress meant both houses, not simply the Senate. For a large part of our nation's history, Congress regulated trade with tariffs, a fee charged by government for permitting imports or exports of products. These tariffs were a main source of revenue for the federal government and were also used to protect certain domestic industries. This continued until the 1930s. Recently, we have undergone subtle changes in how we implement international commerce, from acts by Congress to agreements that include much more than commerce, to partnerships which are including the merger of much of our economy and society, including our police and military. Since 2005, we're hearing more about partnerships. As the slide indicates, partnership normally refers to a legal relationship between two or more persons. When we apply the word partnership to relationships between nations, you can see that the governments of these nations are working together in governing their block of nations, no longer independent. The government leaders are using the partnership terminology to the extent that they are planning the economic and political integration of the nations involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. At this point, let's discuss what free trade is. Free trade is defined as international trade that is free of such government interference as import quotas, export subsidies, and protective tariffs. Let's provide a little history of the free trade policy. In 1776, Scottish economist and moral philosopher Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. which established a new trade policy called free trade. It featured the reduction of tariffs and regulations on trade. Now, we're not criticizing classical free trade policy as established by Adam Smith. However, we do criticize the present-day free trade policy that consists of negotiating complex trade agreements or partnerships between nations that do reduce tariffs, but also include provisions for managed trade as well as many other entanglements. We call this the free trade agenda. Let's move on to an example of how a merger was sold as free trade, that of Europe. It was done a step at a time, gradually accelerating into the European Union. Now, at first, the people were sold on the European coal and steel community in 1952 among 6 nations. They included France and Germany. The next free trade agreement established the European Economic Community in 1957. Next came the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, which established the European Union. Finally, the Lisbon Treaty of 2007, which established an EU constitution. The people of Europe were told they would be able to vote on the constitution. Once the people of France and the Netherlands rejected the constitution in their vote, no other country was allowed to vote again, and the EU constitution was ratified by treaty at Lisbon in 2007. In other words, the people of the member states of the European Union lost the independence of their respective nations without a vote of the people. With the loss of independence came the loss of the ability to determine their own future. Now the European Union has 28 formally independent nations, which are now known as member states, and adding to that number almost every year. Now, these states are virtually under the complete control of the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Central Bank, and a Court of Justice of the European Union. Every nation that has been added to the EU has lost its independence without a vote of the people. Not only have they lost their independence to the EU, their very own constitution subordinates every member state to the United Nations. Many different agreements and treaties have been signed since 1951 to build the European Union. There are quite a number of these. And each was a salami slice made to look harmless, until the European socialists had accomplished their goal of a superstate for Europe, the dream of Napoleon, Hitler, and Stalin. Just how were the Europeans deceived? This is what Bernard Connolly, former EU official, had to say about it. Quote, "It has now become clear to us that what we thought was a common market is nothing more than a project to create a European federal superstate in which our sovereignty, Britain's national identity, would be extinguished." In 2003, Christopher Booker and Richard North published a book called The Great Deception, subtitled The Secret History of the European Union. They called the EU, quote, "a slow-motion coup d'etat, the most spectacular coup d'etat in history. An even bigger coup d'etat is already being negotiated by the United States and the European Union." Let's look again at how our trade policy evolved. First, the Constitution gave Congress power to regulate foreign trade in 1787. Then in the 1930s, Congress started to delegate trade policy authority to the President. And then in the 1970s, Congress began to cede more trade policy authority to the President with fast-track authority. What is fast-track? Congress gives the President authority to negotiate trade agreements. That requires Congress to vote completed agreements up or down within 60 days with no amendments or filibusters. Fast-track was in effect in 1974 through 1994. And then again in 2002 through 2007. Now Obama wants it back. Fast track has enabled the free trade agenda to move forward. NAFTA and other free trade agreements have come during the fast track years. Now let's look at the progress towards a merger of Canada, Mexico, and the United States into a North American Union. In 1979, presidential candidate Ronald Reagan kicked things off with his announcement of his strong support for a North American Accord, which, with hindsight, can be seen as the embryonic proposal for a North American Union. In 1989, under President George H.W. Bush, we got the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, our nation's first free trade agreement. This led to a large trade deficit with Canada. One of the reasons we were told we needed the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which we got under Bill Clinton in 1994, between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. NAFTA laid the foundation for the Security and Prosperity Partnership in 2005 under President George W. Bush, which quickly took on the nickname North American Union. This was curtailed during Bush's tenure by the intervention of the John Birch Society. Obama has now reinstituted the process under such names as the North American Leaders Summits to disguise what's going on. To sum up what we've just been saying, no matter what the administration, whether it was Republican or Democrat, they have been negotiating treaties, so-called free trade treaties, that have involved us in foreign entanglements. And they range from trying to involve us from the free trade area of Americas, to the NAFTA agreement, to the Security and Prosperity Partnership, and now into these other partnerships with Europe and the Pacific. Now we have a new partnership our government is working on, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Right now it involves 12 nations in the Pacific Rim. It's going to be a European Union type bloc for the Asia-Pacific region. Ultimately, they want all 21 nations of APEC, or the Asia-Pacific Economic Corporation, to economically and politically integrate our countries. This includes China and Russia. What will that mean to be economically and politically integrated? It will mean the loss of our independence in our economics and our political government. That's literally what it means. In addition, we're involved in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. That's a free trade agreement between the United States and the European Union. Now we know what free trade means in Europe. It means superstate. Free trade was only the verbiage they used to fool the Europeans into forming this huge regional government. It would lead to economic and political integration of the United States and Europe. Now, keep in mind, political and economic integration means losing our freedoms, whether it's in Asia or whether it's in Europe. Let me tell you a story about what happened to me in Europe when I was over there investigating the ramifications of the fall of the Berlin Wall for the New American Magazine. Part of what we were doing over there, we actually got in the office of the Public Relations Director for the European Community, which was the precursor of the European Union. And he said to me, looked me right in the eye across his desk, and said, when we get this all together, meaning the European Union, we're going to be bigger than you geographically and economically. And we're going to drag the United States into this union, kicking and screaming if necessary. And I thought, that's very arrogant. I also thought, why aren't these other newspapers and magazines that come into his office reporting what he's saying? Because if he's saying that to me, he surely must have been saying it to them. But what we know is that these organizations, such as the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, etc., are for these free trade agreements. So they wouldn't want to report on what the European socialists really have in mind for us, and that is economic and political integration, something a lot different than free trade. Now, the John Birch Society put a halt to the FTAA, the Free Trade Area of Americas. We also put a halt to the Security and Prosperity Partnership, and we fully intend to put a halt to these partnerships that they are negotiating and trying to put on the American people. One of the tools that we've developed, and we've developed several, is a special edition of the New American Magazine. Now, in this particular issue, you can find all the details that you need about these partnerships that they are trying to impose on us. Also, we have my book, which gets into all the ramifications of foreign entanglements, not just free trade. Here is just a panorama of some of the tools that we've developed and are continuing to develop for you to use to inform people in your community about the problems with free trade. We can stop the free trade agenda with your help. These trade deals threaten our national independence, our freedoms, and our economy. It is incumbent on all of us to do something about it. First, educate yourself and then others with the tools available. Those showing you this presentation have most of them available here and now. Second, provide leadership for groups in your community. You already know more than they do about the subject. It will be up to you to lead them into a better understanding of the problem and its solution. You can get the latest updates by texting the word trade to the number 88588 on your cell phone. Or you can go to jbs.org and keep apprised of all the latest information, activities, updates, suggestions on the page Choose Freedom, Stop the Free Trade Agenda. And this will inform you how you can help defeat the free trade agenda. Thank you.